It's a tape recorder, yes. It's not a radio, but it's worth looking at, I feel. It's quite historic. Well, it's quite old anyway. This is a Pi 9123, also badged as a Philips N4307, I think, and also as a Stellar 9123 in some markets. So a number of brands under the Philips label from the 1960s use this chassis, and it's a 4-track mono tape recorder. So you've got an option here, you can say 1 to 4 and 3, 1 4 3 2. You can see this switch here. Now the reason why it's showing 2 tracks is because you can do track 1 on side 1 and track 4 on side 2 basically, and then do track 2 on side 1 and track 3 on side 2. I could have got those in the wrong order. I'll correct it on the screen if I have. And then there's this parallel which allows you to play the 2 tracks on the current side in parallel, so you could have maybe a voice on one half of it and an instrument on another if you wanted to do that, although it's not particularly easy with this machine to get that sort of thing. Apparently there was also an option to get an extra unit that you could connect to this for a stereo playback, but you could only play back pre-recorded stereo tapes, which I think were not a very common thing even in those days. But you couldn't record in stereo, as I said. The recording is always mono on one or both of the tracks. I think you can record in parallel on both the tracks if you set it to this. Otherwise, it's got the usual transport controls here, really chunky mechanical things. Some controls for volume, tone, which affects, these obviously only affect the internal speaker, which is down here. And then you've got a rudimentary mixer where you can mix between the radio phono input, as it calls it, in other words the recorded music or input, or the microphone input. So you could have a rudimentary disc jockey type show you could do with this. Now what's wrong with this? Well, sometimes it doesn't turn on, so we've got a bit of a situation here where it's not turning on. Now it was turning on before I did this, and now it's not. So I think there's something wrong, because it looks like it's had a bash at some point, and the voltage selector thing at the back doesn't seem to be very reliable, which is a bit worrying, and probably arcing and sparking as well. So that's the first problem with it, and I think what I might just do is strap the voltage regulator out and just connect it up as 240 volts. So I'm never going to use it on anything other than the 240 volts in this country. Also, when it does run, there's no sound from the speaker, but there is sound from the DIN outputs, so it does work in terms of audio. I haven't tried recording on it, but it doesn't work as far as the speaker in terms of audio. And I also tried connecting an external speaker to it, and that you get a little more sound, but it's very distorted. So I suspect the audio amplifier is also faulty. So there's a few things to look at on this. So let's get started. Well, that's typical, isn't it? As soon as I stopped recording, it started powering up again. So when you turn it on, you can hear a lot of noise from the motor. That's the motor runs continuously on this, and it is quite an obtrusive noise, but not unusual for that era of tape recorder, I think. So I can demonstrate at least the transport controls, which do work. There's a big stop bar here. Fast forward and rewind works. There's a bit of floppy action here when it starts playing, but the pause seems to work correctly. I don't know if you can hear. You can hear very distorted music. Actually, I've got it on parallel. Let's put it onto there. Now it's gone completely. No, I don't think you can really hear it now, but you might have just heard a few pops and crackles. So that's the situation we're in. So I thought I could give you a live demonstration of that before we start taking it apart. I'm also just going to do a quick check on what happens when it comes off the end. Does it have auto stop? I think we can safely say it doesn't. You have to press the stop bar yourself, which is a bit annoying, but there you go. That's obviously not a feature that was available on this. Also, it's a 2-speed machine. I thought I should have mentioned that. You've got a little selector here. You can go either at 1 7/8 inches per second, which will give you a lot more time, or 3 3/4, which was the more normal thing to be used. I think if you want a decent quality, 1 7/8 inch per second is about the speed of an audio cassette, although it should still be better quality than an audio cassette, I think, of the time. Certainly you wouldn't expect, although this would have been fairly good quality at the time compared to a cassette of that time, compared to a more modern cassette deck, it wouldn't be anywhere near it. Some machines, not this one, had also an option for 7.5 inches per second, which is a basic lower level professional recording speed that's used in broadcasting, but this one doesn't have it. You can only do 1 7/8 or 3 3/4, or if you wish to put that in the metric system, that will be 4.75 centimeters per second or 9.5 centimeters per second. Right, so I've got the thing apart. You can see the voltage switcher here, which is riveted to the chassis and has broken off here. Also, this arm, which is, connecting it, is bent, so it does lend weight to the idea it's got dropped at some point. This has come off. This I can't really get at. It's one of these things, so if you can see the little pointer there, that's where it should be. So if I put it, it's quite tight to twist as well. So to my mind, that groove lining up with that there where it says 240 should mean that it's on 240 at the moment. I do notice though that there should be one step between 240 and 110, and there seems to be two, and the same to 127 and the same to 220, so that really doesn't sound right. I think what I'll have to do is drill this out, have a look at it, see if it's rescuable, and if so, then I can probably clean it up or possibly make it work. But to be honest, I'm not too worried about it. If I just hardwire it for 240, that'll be fine for me. All of the electronics is on this board here at the bottom. I'm hoping that it's just a dodgy capacitor or something like that. Those capacitors will probably be quite old. One of these at least looks a little bit bulgy there, so maybe that's a problem, and we can try changing the caps and see if that improves things. It uses the old, I can't remember what the name of the case is, but it's these sort of power transistors, which you can just about see here. I don't know how easy that, well, I'm pretty much guaranteed it's not going to be easy to get hold of these anymore, and finding substitutes in that position is difficult, so hopefully those transistors haven't gone, because that could be a problem. But anyway, I'm going to start with the voltage switcher. Right, next issue I've found. I've got this out, drilled through those, straightened those brackets there, so it should be able to go back. But before measuring this, I thought I'd check the switch, and if I go across, it's quite difficult to get at, but if I go from that red, which seems to come off the live pole of the switch, and go on the other side of the switch with it pressed in, really quite difficult to get your probe in there. So yeah, going on the live wire coming from the plug and going to that red pin there, we're seeing 0.7 ohms, 0.6 ohms, 0.5 ohms, so quite low, given a bit of solder resistance and stuff, so that looks okay. If I go to the blue, which is coming from the neutral and goes directly to this, if I go from the top side of the switch, that wire there, so that's just the wire in it, you can see I get 0.2, 0.3, but if I go to the other side of the switch, I'm getting stupid amounts. And I've tried cleaning it. I also got down, 80k, things like that. I've tried cleaning it, it's not made a lot of difference, not made any difference really. So I think I'll need to get that switch out and have a look at it. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can quite see, but the screws for it are coming from the other side, so I'm going to have to take the faceplate off as well. So that's the next job. Right, well, when I took the switch out, or tried to take the switch out, it completely disintegrated. The pins came right off on the neutral side, leaving nothing there to solder to. So that could well have been the reason why it was giving rather high resistance readings on that side of it. So I thought, well, the only answer is to get another switch, which I managed to find one which I could fit in with a little bit of drilling to get the holes in the right place for the mounting. The woes didn't end there though, because then the button, I thought, well, I need to take the button off this, but then the button just broke off. I don't know whether it was supposed to be glued in or something, or whether that was a normal mounting. I can see a sort of a hole in here, but it doesn't seem to be a standard size. So I'm probably going to have to put a round button on the new Switch because I don't have any square push buttons for it, so it won't be exactly original. Nevertheless, I have sorted all that now. You can see that the Switch was here and it's covered up by this Paxton strip because the terminals are on view, but what I've actually done is mounted it. If I can get you in here. So I mounted it the other way around here, and I've also shrouded the mains connections there. So I put that back in for completeness, which isn't really needed anymore. Also, the rivet, I had to drill out the rivets here for this voltage. I keep calling it a voltage regulator. It's not a voltage regulator, it's a voltage selector. That seemed to be okay in the end, but it had sort of moved around and this had got bent, so I straightened all that up, put screws and nuts in instead of rivets, and that seems to be okay now. So the thing is working again now from the point of view of switching on, but we've still got this problem with no speaker audio. Now, of course, the problem here is there's a lot of mains kicking around on this thing when it's plugged in. There's a lot of bare wires. I don't know if this runs at full mains or at a low voltage. This is a motor here, so it's quite easy to brush your hand on that, which I don't want to do.
The result is death.
The low voltage bit with the amplifier should be fine, though. We just got to make sure. I've done a quick visual inspection of it. There's one or two capacitors that are bulging a little bit, but there's no leakage I can see. These blue Philips capacitors, you're finding quite a lot of kit at this time, and I imagine that it's not a surprise to find them in kit that is made by Philips. I generally don't find that they are a big problem. It's very rare that I find that those have gone out of spec or leaked or failed or anything like that. There's these big ones here which appear to be reservoir capacitors that are just in parallel across the power supply. That one is in the audio stage, and I said it looks bulged a little bit. But looking around, I can't see evidence of anything that looks like it's overheated. The resistors are all fairly modern, and you know, I can't see anything. When I look at that board, it doesn't look to me as if it should be a problem. It's mostly silicon transistors, BC108s and the like, but as I said before, it's got these old germanium power transistors screwed onto this heatsink here, along with this thermistor here, which monitors it and you know, helps stabilize the bias. Again, it's quite rare for these to go, but it has to be said, it's not working, so something must have gone wrong. Let's go to the nearer the input on the board. So I think this capacitor here is one that I can get something from.
As the government today published its review of...
So there is some signal at the input there. Let's go to the other end, go to the output transistor. Wow!
Universities Institute for so-called deplatforming or no platforming, refusing by the forum for speakers that hold content.
So the output transistors have got signal on them, and it's quite high. I'm going to try and avoid the mains here. Yeah, I'm going to the speaker connection. Actually, I'll just go over here to the speaker. Perhaps I won't, because there's a lot of mains around there and I'd have to push my finger underneath it. I wonder if the speaker's actually gone. No, the speaker looks okay.
All in the end, have the lightning seeds and madness. And do you know what? I'll play you some madness in the awesome 80s lunch hour. Next.
Well, as you can see from that clip, it's actually making sound again. I had it there in end-to-end mode where I just press the record button without the play, which allows you to just pass the signal through and potentially use it as a PA system. Interesting trying to have a look at what the problem was there, because I thought, well, you know, I got signal on the output transistors and there was practically nothing on the loudspeaker, so that sort of led me to the output coupling capacitor, and I thought, well, that's probably gone wrong. And indeed, when I took that out, it was somewhat rubbish, as you can see here, in terms of its equivalent series resistance. So I replaced that, or I didn't initially replace it. I thought I'll just check this out. So I got a capacitor and held it across. Basically took the speaker lead off, held the capacitor across. It's rated in the diagram. It says 680 microfarad, 16 volts. So I got a 680 microfarad 16 volt capacitor and put it in there and just held it on to make sure, and indeed the sound did come back. However, I noticed when I had my hands on the capacitor it was getting a bit warm, so I thought, well, that's not quite right, is it? If it's a 16 volt capacitor, it's correctly rated, it shouldn't be getting hot. I then had a look at the voltage on the output transistor side of the capacitor before, the DC side of the capacitor, and it was 25 volts, whereas in the diagrams you can see here it's supposed to be about 13.3 or something like that. It's strange that it worked at all, that we got any sound out of it, but it did sound almost okay then. The way that would happen is that the driver transistor, which in the circuit you can just about see here at the back, is a squarish thing screwed onto a heatsink. That being open circuit would drive the voltage up to 25 volts. And indeed that was what was happening. You were getting about 21 volts across the capacitor, which is much higher than its rating. The capacitor that we took out was actually not 680 microfarads, it was 390. I have a feeling that this happened before and somebody did what I was about to do and just change the output capacitor and leave it at that. And the output capacitor then gets slowly cooked by being over voltage, apart from the sound being a bit distorted as well, I'd imagine. So this is the one that was in there. This is an AC187. Now, most of the AC series transistors look like this. They're in a little... autofocus isn't helping us here, is it? They're in a little cylinder, but then some versions of it go into a sort of heatsink around it like this, and there's a screw hole through it, which is like this one, and you can screw it onto the heatsink. Now, I didn't have one of those. I had one of these. I put that in, it seemed to work, but it was getting hot. I think it's a poor design that the driver transistor gets that hot, really. It should not do so. I then got hold of a proper AC187 similar to this one. Bit of a nuisance because I had to pay £5 for a small order charge, even though the transistors themselves only cost about a fiver for the pair. And I can understand small order charges, but it then took 4 days to come. I mean, I've got to pay £5 for handling charge for a little thing like this. You'd think first class post wouldn't have been too much of a thing to stretch to, but there you go. And in any case, there's always going to be a small order charge, because who wants 100 of these things nowadays? Anyway, ignoring my moaning about supply chains, that was replaced and it all seems to be okay now. Now the capacitor I put in was actually, I think, a 330 microfarad 50 volt capacitor. I didn't have a 25 volt one. It is rated at 16 volts, as I said in the circuit diagram. I have a principle here, which obviously Philips did not agree with, which is that if your supply rail is 25 volts, then you should assume that at any point 25 volts can appear somewhere on your electrolytic capacitors, so you should rate them accordingly. I had a look at some of these blue capacitors. That one is a new blue capacitor, but really the one I took out, there wasn't anything wrong with it. As I said before, these blue Philips capacitors seem to be quite reliable. When I see those in a piece of equipment, I don't usually have to replace them. Now, in order to show you it playing back or recording, I'm going to have to put it back together because this thing doesn't really operate properly in the vertical position. Oh, just one more thing to look at. One moment. This meter here, the original meter that was in there for recording level, didn't work at all. It was just internally the mechanism had gone. I did have an edge meter. It's not the right sort. It's one that sits in the center and goes positive and negative, so not quite what we want for this, but it does actually move. I put like a 1k resistor or 1.5k resistor in series with it to knock the volts down so it reduces the deflection, but I might eventually get a proper meter for that. These things are still available, but they don't have obviously the same scale as the original one had. And in terms of mechanics, I haven't really touched anything. The belts seem fairly new. You can see a chap called Don Bewley has serviced this in 2021. He's put a lot of Loctite and things you can see on the nuts there, so I'm guessing he's lined it all up. Some of the grease maybe dried out a little bit. I keep getting it on my fingers, which isn't good. But in general, I think the mechanics is all pretty solid, so I'm not going to do anything more with that. Right, so let's have a look at this machine now put back together. This is the Pi Cambridge, made in Austria. I think about the only thing made in Cambridge was this label here, although Pi was a Cambridge-based company and part of the Philips Group at that time. I was looking for something to demo the replay, and I found an old recording among my tape collection back from my student radio days on a summer afternoon in 1982. I haven't been able to find out what the exact date was, but you can hear me making a mess of the 3 o'clock news junction here. I put it through the mixer rather than through the speaker because you'll be able to hear the quality a bit better there.
Tight fit there, and Fantasy Island. That's on the new KTL compilation LP called Turbo Tracks, which was just out last week, I think, but I played it this week. So I wasn't on the air at this time last week. So there you are. Coming to 3 o'clock now, the news from my end here on Imperial College Radio, 301 metres in the medium wave. That's frequency of 999 kilohertz. Stay tuned after the news for more music on the summer sound of Southside.
It's 3 o'clock. This is Bill Bingham.
Bill Bingham is still going. He was a newsreader on LBC or IRN, depending on how you looked at it in those days. But he's got a show on Boom Radio at 10 o'clock on Sunday evenings now. Almost the graveyard slot, but not quite. He's a trooper. He's still on the wireless. Shall we have a quick listen to the news from 42 years ago?
Israel has launched air and ground attacks on Syrian and Palestinian positions in Lebanon.
Well, that could have been the news from 42 minutes ago. Let's fast forward to one of the more interesting stories.
An Old Bailey court has been hearing how the Rolls-Royce, which belonged to comedian Mike Yarwood, was used as a getaway car in a £350,000 jewellery raid. Tim Crook reports.
I love the fact that their legal correspondent's name was Tim Crook.
Bond Street jewelers Kuczynski's were raided by a gang armed with a sawn-off shotgun and handgun. They pulled up outside in Mike Yarwood's stolen Rolls, wearing smart ties and suits. Inside, staff were threatened, "Don't look or I'll blow your face away. Nobody move an inch or you're all dead." One raider tried to put on his monkey mask but was hit over the head by a cleaning lady wielding her broomstick.
This could have been the subject for a BBC sitcom, really, couldn't it?
The jury was told most of the raid was captured on video. The gang fled with gold, diamonds and platinum, using the Rolls as a bulldozer, shunting vehicles out of the way and causing £7,000 worth of damage.
Well, that was a lot of money in those days. I was trying to locate the date of this recording by looking for that robbery, but the only thing I've been able to find is a picture of the bust of Rolls-Royce, which is here.
Londoner Anthony Petch denies taking part in the robbery. Tim Crook, IRN, the Old Bailey.
Independent Radio News, it's 3 minutes past 3.
Imperial College Radio on 301 metres.
Well, we'll fade that out before we get a copyright hit on Crosby, Stills and Nash. So I think you'll agree the playback doesn't sound too bad. I think we'll try some recording on it. Now, something I've just noticed here, and I cannot blame Don Bewley, who did the mechanical work on this, I assume. It's definitely all down to me, which is that if you look at this tape counter here, I've started it on 0 there. Actually, it's not going around at all now. Oh yes, it is. There we go. You'll notice it's going backwards. It's gone to 999. Now it's going to 998. Obviously it should be going forwards. Now, I did notice on opening the case that the belt which was driving that was twisted round, and I thought, oh, have I done that? Or, you know, because I moved some things around, have I accidentally twisted it or something and it came off? I couldn't remember. Actually, it was deliberately twisted, so it went the right way. I'm not going to take it apart now to fix that counter, but if anybody else had noticed that before you start commenting on it, that's the reason why. It's my fault entirely for trying to correct something that didn't need to be corrected. Now, I got this tape recorded a long time ago. It's taken me a while to get round to looking at it. I bought a reel of new old stock Maxell, I think, tape. a while ago, anticipating that I was going to have to work on this thing. And of course, when it comes to working on the thing, I've actually lost that reel of tape. Hence, I had to get out my old stock of ancient tapes. Hence, you heard some historic news and DJing. But you do have to sort of be careful when you're recording on machines of this age, domestic machines of this age, as to what sort of tape you use. Now, the tape I've got on it, threaded on it here, is this TDK Audua, which, although it says professional studio quality on it, that's everything said, you know, anything you got from Woolworths said professional studio quality on it in those days. Didn't mean it was. This is average sort of finished tape that these sort of tape recorders would have used. Perhaps they've been at the more expensive end. And I'm going to try recording some YouTube music on it, because I think there is a bit of a difference, and I'm not sure whether you'll be able to hear it on YouTube, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. You can only hear stuff through the speaker at the moment because it doesn't come out in end-to-end mode out of the feed into the mixer. Let's rewind that and listen to it through the mixer. Now this time I've used a different kind of tape, which is professional studio quality tape. Yeah, I didn't actually steal it, I just assumed that in 35 years time they wouldn't need tape anymore. And I've recorded the same piece of music, or a bit of the same piece of music on that. Now let's take a listen to that. Now to me that sounds quite bassy and muffled, which compared to the earlier one, I mean neither of them are brilliant. This is not the highest quality tape recorder, but the professional quality tape sounds a little bit worse to me. Is this a surprise? No, I don't think it is. This machine is just not designed to drive that quality of tape. Nobody would have bought that tape for domestic use, and obviously it was specially made for the BBC, and their tape recorders were 4 times the size of this and cost the same as a small car. So, you know, it's not surprising that it's a little bit worse. The main reason is the bias that is needed to actually drive the tape, and also, I don't want to get too much into a discussion of bias here. You can look it up on the internet if you're interested, but bias has to be applied to a tape to make it record properly and linearly, and professional machines tend to use AC bias. This uses DC bias, which is generally inferior, and I just don't think it's got the right level of bias to sound good on a professional tape. But it's an important thing if you because nowadays you're just going to be getting a load of new old stock tape. You can't really buy that stuff anymore, and really these things were never really cheap for the average person, but they were cheap in terms of tape recorders compared to professional ones, and you need to use cheap non-professional tape even if it says professional on the box. The other thing you have difficulty with recording on this is it has DIN sockets. Now DIN sockets, themselves are not, well, no, they are bad actually. It's a standard which I don't think is brilliant. Well, no, it's a standard which is complete rubbish, to be honest, but it was used a lot in Europe in the 1960s and 70s, and we've seen those sockets on a number of sets. But if you actually follow the DIN standard, the levels that you have to put in are really bizarre, because it's a constant current system, not a constant voltage system like we used to do with phono sockets or jack sockets. And as a result, you got all these things where you got a special lead that had a 1 mega ohm resistor in it, and the idea was you could use the same socket for both microphone and line, and of course that doesn't really work very well. It's bad for either. They have at least split the microphone and line on this one, but it's still quite difficult to get a decent recording level on it. Anyhow, there we go. The Pi 9123, also known as the Philips N4307 or the Stella 9123, is actually not a bad piece of kit. It's pretty solid. It's not lots of little bits of plastic that break apart over the years like a lot of older cassette decks do. If you got a cassette deck from this era, you're likely to have broken piano key controls and things like that, which would not be fixable. This is actually usable. I'm not sure I'm actually going to use it very much, but you could do, you know. And it's a talking point for visitors, of course, if your visitors have the same obsessions as I do. I'll see you on the next one.